Alright guys, BLM here. We're back with a new video. In this video, we're going to be talking about Avengers Endgame, and I did not plan on making this video. This is kind of a more impromptu video. I just came out of this film not too long ago, and I really couldn't stop thinking about the movie, and I decided, you know what, let's do a video about it. So first off, there will be spoilers for the entire movie here, so don't watch this video if you don't want to get spoiled. I'm going to pretty much talk about almost everything in the film. And to give context here, obviously I've watched every MCU film so far, and I really adored Infinity War, which made me really excited for Endgame, especially because it was obviously this conclusion to this 22 film arc. And to be honest, Endgame's probably the most hyped I've been for any piece of media since Assassin's Creed 3 probably. However, unlike Assassin's Creed 3, this film pretty much gave me everything that I wanted from it, and it perfectly wraps up the storyline of everything that came before it. Now, we're going to pretty much talk about this movie in chronological order, so let's just get into it. So, obviously we're going to start with the beginning of the film here, which I know a lot of people called the first hour of this movie slow, which it is, but it isn't a good way, I feel like. I feel like the first third really has some great character moments throughout from the entire cast, and also perfectly sets up these characters' arcs for this movie. And I feel like the entire film is so well acted as well. And you get that right from the beginning with the Hawkeye scene, which I thought, where he loses his family, I thought that was really good. And then also the scene where Tony Stark's giving his monologue while in space. And then you also have his relation with Nebula, which I thought was great as well. And then like almost right after that, you get Captain Marvel saving them, which I thought that happened really quick. I wasn't anticipating that happening within like the first 10 minutes of the movie. It really happened almost right away. But again, obviously after watching the rest of the movie, you obviously understand why that is the case. And that's something else I guess I should mention is also the 3-hour runtime. It didn't really feel like 3 hours. Again, 3 hours is a lot of time, but the film was really well paced throughout. And also early on, we get the Avengers finding Thanos really quickly. I really like the fact that Thanos becomes a farmer and that sort of stuff. Again, that was taken from the comics. But to see Thanos get beheaded by Thor that early into film, that really surprised me at the time. At the time, I did find it strange, obviously, that Thor was able just to chop his head off that quickly here. But obviously, it's explained that obviously he destroyed the Infinity Stone, so whatever, it's fine. But this is also the point where I 100% knew we were going to get into time travel. I mean, at this point, there was no way around it. Obviously, like, we didn't know that Thanos was going to be pretty much the main antagonist of the movie. If not, at least be in the movie more than this. I mean, we already got footage in one of the trailers where it showed Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor walking up to Thanos. So it's like, we knew that he was in the movie more. And obviously there's a lot of speculation about time travel before, so obviously this is when I pretty much knew, yeah, we were getting time travel. And speaking of Thanos here, though, I really do think he's the best villain in all the MCU, and I don't even think it's really close. To be honest, he's probably one of my favorite villains in all of film. I mean, like, there's probably a couple exceptions there, but his portrayal in Infinity War was masterful in my opinion. I really think he was one of the best villains there, but again, them not messing it up here in Endgame, I think that really solidifies it for me that he's one of my favorite villains. And now's where we get the 5 years later, which I really like how they did it here. The fact that it first came out the 5, obviously a few seconds later to years, then later. And you could tell that they were expecting this to be a big reveal. Again, but that's pretty much what I was expecting was going to happen. Especially when we saw just the 5. It was like, okay, yeah, years later. It's like they're not going to put like 5 weeks later or anything if they're like doing it that slowly. But either way, like I was expecting a pretty big time skip coming into it. Mind you, I didn't think 5 years. I was thinking more like 2 or 3, but 5 years, whatever, who cares? And again, this is also a point where we get a lot of well-acted scenes. That's what I said about this first hour of the movie. While it's definitely slower than the second and third hours, we do get a lot of great performances here and a lot of great character scenes. In particular, in this section, I feel like Scarlett Johansson's performance is really strong, setting up her sacrifice that comes later in the film. We also got Scott Lang's return from the quantum realm here, which, I mean, again, rats, like, accidentally activating the thing. It's like, whatever. Again, it's a comic book sort of thing that happened, but it's fine. But I thought this was a great way to set up the time travel elements of the movie that were going to obviously come later. And I thought his reunion with his daughter was a touching scene as well. Though this entire thing with time travel, I think it could lead to some pretty dumb plot holes that we'll talk about a bit later. So obviously this is where they try to get the gang back together. We get to see Tony Stark's first appearance after a time skip. And once I saw that he had a daughter, I instantly knew he was going to die in this movie. Once we saw that he had a daughter, again, this was something that was set up in Infinity War. However, I was thinking that it was going to happen at the end of this movie. I thought it was like at the end of this movie we were going to get Tony Stark and Pepper Potts having a kid. However, the fact that it happens at the beginning of this movie, I mean, really, obviously it was going to happen once the time skip happened, but once that happened, I instantly knew, okay, Tony Stark is going to die here. Because I feel like it concludes his story arc. I feel like there's nothing else to do with Tony Stark outside of just be a mentor to other characters, but is that really a reason to keep him around? I did love how the inclusion of his daughter did change his character a bit more, where he starts to act a bit more selfishly here. Obviously, like, he starts off being extremely selfish in the earlier movies, but then, like, by the time of Avengers, obviously, he starts to become more of a hero. But then here, 5 years later, again, he's back to being a bit selfish. Obviously, it's more so about his family, more so about his daughter. But the fact that obviously he didn't want to work on the time travel thing because he didn't want to lose his daughter, I mean, at the end of the day, that is a selfish thing. But I really love how this sets up his character arc for this film, which, again, we'll talk about a bit later. Then we meet Banner afterwards, who obviously was finally able to control his Hulk powers and stuff. That was fun. I don't know. I mean, like, it's really strange, the fact that he's pretty much CGI the entire film. The fact that Mark Ruffalo pretty much only actually appears as himself in that one scene with the Ancient One, but I thought this was a fun scene as well. And also you got the taking the pictures of the kids and stuff. That was a funny scene. And then we get the Thor, which, again, we have the fat, drunk Thor, which was funny. Originally, I thought it was like kind of like a gimmick. I was kind of worried that they were just doing this for the jokes. But then you kind of realize, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, again, he lost his mom. He lost his father. He lost Loki. He lost Heimdall. He lost Asgard. I mean, he pretty much lost everything. So, I mean, it does make sense that he's like this depressed and this whatever. And then adding on even the Thanos situation, which obviously this all makes sense after that. And then we get to time travel itself, which I loved its use in this movie. I love the references to, obviously, like Back to the Future and Terminator, and the fact that it's not working like those movies, where, again, I've always had problems with movies like that, where time travel, again, you're just setting yourself up for plot holes. There's no way you can get around time travel in the sense of Back to the Future and Terminator, where every change that you make in the past changes the future. It just makes no sense from a narrative standpoint, and it never will make sense. However, I felt like Avengers set it up perfectly, where this time travel creates a new timeline that won't affect the current timeline. And this is very similar to something that Dragon Ball Z does, which I thought was decently done in Dragon Ball Z as well. Though, it does feel like Avengers went out of its way to create plot holes, and we'll talk about that at the end of the movie. But just the concept of this time travel, I did really enjoy. I really loved the time heist stuff as well. Obviously, this was great and it was so perfect for this final movie to go back to scenes from the previous movies, to go back to the time of Avengers, go back to the time of Thor: The Dark World, go back to the time of Guardians of the Galaxy. I thought it was a really nice touch, and it was really cool to see all these cameos from previous characters as well. I was really surprised they were able to get people like Robert Redford back, people like Natalie Portman back. Obviously, Rene Russo was really great in this movie. I just really loved this entire section of the movie. And I also love the part where they're planning out this heist as well, because it's like they mentioned that, oh, all of us have come into contact with Infinity Stones. Mind you, obviously there was one exception, but still, it was still a really great scene. And the fact that we go through each Infinity Stone and talk about where it is at a certain time and all this plotting out, and I really loved this section. It was really, really great. So here, obviously, Banner, Roger, Lang, and Tony Stark all go back to New York in 2012, obviously during the events of the Avengers. And again, there were a whole bunch of great scenes here. I mean, Banner's conversation with the Ancient One was great. Captain America's Hail Hydra scene, that was great. The Cap versus Cap fight, that was fantastic. And then you have a lot of comedic moments here that were fun too. Again, like Hulk walking down the stairs. You had America's ass stuff with Captain America. That was great. I just thought this section was done so well. And then from a narrative perspective, obviously the plot moves on here after Lang and Stark mess up on getting the Tesseract. So they decide to go back to the 70s, where we get some more great moments. We get the callback to Captain America's relationship with Peggy Carter, which obviously is important later. We also get to see Hank Pym young, and then Howard Stark, and oh my god, I love the conversation here between Howard Stark and Tony Stark. It was just such a great scene, as I felt like it really wrapped up Tony Stark's character so well. Especially the line where Howard said that he, I forgot the exact line, but it was something along the lines of, like, he wished that he did something for the greater good instead of something for himself. And I felt like this, again, at this point, you 1,000,000,000% know that Tony Stark is going to die in a move that's like sacrificing himself. But I just thought this was such a great wrap-up to Tony Stark's character, and it was a great way to have Tony Stark get closure from his problems with his parents' death. Then we got Rocket and Thor in Asgard during Thor: The Dark World. And this section was really great as well. Again, I really love the conversation between Thor and his mother, which I thought, again, was a great conclusion of his character arc, with him getting over his depression that he's currently in. Then we get the Hawkeye and Black Widow scene on Vormir, which, again, once you knew that they were going to Vormir, you knew one of them was going to die. Obviously, they would have to from a narrative standpoint. But again, I was expecting Hawkeye. I was really expecting Hawkeye the entire time. And really, it was during that fight between, like, where they're essentially fighting over who gets to sacrifice themselves. Like, I was really, like, it kept on going back and forth. I was always thinking, okay, maybe it is Black Widow. Then, no, it can't be Black Widow because she's having a movie coming out later. And then guess what? It was Black Widow. Again, I thought this was very well acted. I thought, again, narrative-wise, like, from the writing standpoint, I think they did a really great job in setting this up earlier in the film. And finally, we have Nebula and Roddy on Morag, which I thought this section was fine. It was probably my least favorite out of all these sections, but I gotta say, I really do love Nebula's performance in this film. I think Karen Gillan did a really good job. Again, surprising considering I never really loved her in the Guardians movies, but I did think she did a really good job in this movie. But out of this entire section, I thought the Thanos stuff was the most interesting stuff here. Again, this brought 2014 Thanos into the narrative, and also brought 2014 Gamora into the narrative, which I thought was interesting. And obviously, this is the point where you know, okay, 2014 Thanos is going to be the main antagonist of this film. Now, with them having all the stones now, obviously, they have this debate over who should use them. Obviously, they eventually pick Banner, as he's technically the strongest Avenger. But I did like this scene where Thor tries to get into this, but obviously everyone knows that he's not in the right state of mind to really do it. And I also love how this also sets up that, again, the strongest Avenger could only survive this, which essentially sets up Tony Stark's death later in the movie. And now they succeed here, obviously, in bringing everyone back, which, again, I really love this as well, the fact that they didn't cop out. There were so many opportunities in this film to cop out at different spots, but they never really did. And this is a point where they didn't bring back Gamora, the original Gamora. They didn't bring back Loki or Heimdall or Black Widow. They didn't bring back any of these people. They just brought back the people that died from the snap. And I felt like this really solidifies my position that Infinity War is probably my favorite MCU movie, as nothing's really undone from that movie. All the stakes that were in that movie pretty much stayed real. I mean, until the very, very end, but it's fine. But alright, but this is the point where now Thanos attacks them in the modern day, and it shows the entire headquarters, which leads up to the fight with Thor, Cap, and Tony fighting against Thanos, which was a fantastic scene, especially the moment where Cap finally uses Mjolnir, which I believe was set up in Age of Ultron. Mind you, I don't necessarily have an issue, but it's never really explained, like, why is he now, like, worthy of using it? But whatever, it's fine. However, something I do question with this entire fight, though, is how strong is Thanos? Because, again, we've seen him fight, obviously, in Infinity War, and he's really strong, but the thing is that Thor almost killed him for, like, one axe strike in that movie. Yet here, he's fighting against Thor with the axe and with Mjolnir. He also is fighting against Cap and Tony at the same time, yet they still can't take him out, and are having a lot of difficulty with him just in general. It's like, I felt like that felt kind of strange. But again, at the end of the day, it doesn't really ruin my experience or anything. But then we get the final battle. All of the people that were brought back return, have this massive battle with Thanos' army. It was fantastic. It really was. I mean, this is probably the best fight scene in any movie ever. It's so great. Minor gripe I have here is the fact that I know a lot of people love this scene, the scene where all the women come together and fight. While it's cool, obviously, I do feel like it's a bit ridiculous from a narrative standpoint. It's like the fact that all these women are coming together at one spot to go ahead and start fighting these people at, like, literally one spot in this battle. It's kind of a ridiculous thing, but again, it's fine. But here we go. The final part of the movie, the big moment of the movie here. We get Stark stealing the Infinity Stones from Thanos and then snaps his own fingers to kill Thanos, along with his entire army, leading to himself dying from the repercussions. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here. I mean, again, I love the way they killed Thanos here. I think this was fantastic. Again, I know some comic book people were not happy with this sort of thing, that they didn't like the fact that heroes had to use the villains, like, sort of techniques against them. I don't care. It really was great. It's really great from a narrative standpoint, in my opinion. I think it really worked really well. I didn't love how, like, Thanos just kind of, like, sat down and just faded away. I kind of wish he kind of said something before he died. I just felt like it was kind of anticlimactic in the sense that he just sits down, that's it. But it's fine. And also, I haven't mentioned this yet. I do love how Thanos' motivations changed through this movie and made him much more menacing, I think. Where, again, originally in Infinity War, his plan was just to take out half of the population. In this movie, his plan is destroy everything and then bring it back in his own vision after he sees that his previous plan didn't work. And I love that. I really do. I think it makes him so much more menacing of a villain, because you know that if the Avengers lose here, they're losing everything this time. But now talking about Tony's death, I gotta be honest, I got emotional. I mean, like, I'm not a very emotional person normally, but this scene really did it for me. I didn't cry or anything, but it's like, it was a really emotional scene. I really like how they did it, where obviously Roddy and Spider-Man are the first two to come up to him, and then right after that we get Pepper Potts. And I really love the performance here by Gwyneth Paltrow, where she is kind of more of a real sort of reaction to this. Where normally, like in any movie, you'd see like someone be hysteric that this person's dying, but instead she kind of waits for him to actually die before going through the hysterics. And she's able to like make her look strong before he actually dies. And I love the line that obviously you can rest now. It's so, it's so great. It really is, especially because obviously like Tony hasn't really been able to really rest since what, Age of Ultron? And then we got the funeral scene, which was so fantastic. It really just felt like a scene that just came from the comics, where you go from like shot to shot of like all these different groups. And again, fantastic scene there. But then we move to the end of the film, like the last things in this film. We got Thor meeting up with Valkyrie, telling her that she's the new queen of Asgard, and he's gonna go off and live his own life or whatever, which was fine. Again, and he joins the Guardians of the Galaxy, which I thought was great. Again, I think Thor is a perfect fit for that, especially after how he was portrayed in Thor Ragnarok. I think he's a perfect fit to join the Guardians of the Galaxy. And then the actual ending of the film here, where Steve Rogers goes back in time to return the Infinity Stones and Mjolnir to their original times, which again, I mean, it's questionable. That's questionable, I feel like, timeline-wise. Again, they talk about it when they talk with the Ancient One, and it's just, that's always been iffy to me in terms of time travel there. But it gets worse, in my opinion, when he shows up elderly right afterwards. Now, this is a great scene from a just basic movie standpoint. Like, it's a great scene. The fact that we see Captain America old, we know this is the end of his story. He passes on the shield to Sam, but it makes no sense. This really makes no sense. They set up earlier in the movie that when you time travel, you create a new timeline. So the fact that this happens now, that means that essentially the things that you do in the past do affect this current timeline. Like, it makes no sense, because this means that Captain America, again, he goes back in time, spends the rest of his life with Peggy Carter. Again, fantastic. That's great. The problem is that he shows up in the modern day. It's like, why? Again, they were doing so great of time travel till that point. It's like, what are you doing? Again, like, it doesn't really like affect my like look at the movie. I still think it's a fantastic movie, but it's still dumb. Again, you set it up earlier in the film that this wouldn't happen, and it does happen. And I feel like this is something that they could have just avoided. They could have just had Captain America tell everyone, I want to go in the past and spend the rest of my life with Peggy, and then him hand over the shield to Sam before he goes back in time. Instead, they have him go back in time and then show up old. It's like, why are we doing this? But it's fine. Whatever. It's dumb, but whatever. And the last thing I'm going to mention here is, again, a potential plot hole. It's not really a plot hole yet, but I think it could be one. And that is essentially the 5-year time skip with the time travel stuff, and the people coming back, all this stuff. This is going to get a bit iffy, I feel like, when it comes to like Spider-Man Far From Home. Again, we don't know for sure yet, but the fact that half the population stayed the same age, essentially, while the other half aged 5 years, I feel like that's going to become kind of confusing from a narrative standpoint. Like, we're going to have, like, Peter Parker, are all of his friends going to just so happen to have been snapped as well? Like, that's kind of dumb, isn't it? Or are we actually going to see some people that did age 5 years within this film? I don't know. It just feels weird. It's really weird. But that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all my thoughts on Avengers Endgame, and to be honest, this was a longer video than I was anticipating, but yeah, okay, I got all that out of my system. That's it for this video. Now, with all this being said, I still think this is one of the best MCU films. Again, I think Infinity War is still my number one. I think this is probably number two. I don't know. I'm like, to be honest, I think at some point I might do a ranking video of all the MCU films. Just why not? There's a couple I do need to rewatch before I do that, though, but I do feel like Endgame probably is number two. I don't know. It's pretty high up there. I mean, it's definitely within top 5. But I still do think I like Infinity War more. So there we go. That's it. That's the entire video. That's everything I've got to say about Endgame. Thank you for watching.